Hey guys, hey thinkers. Welcome to this week's episode of the Thinking Podcast. And I'm excited to have Elle Russ with us today. She's the host of the Primal Blueprint podcast, which is a top 20 health podcast on iTunes, and also a bona fide expert in biohacking herself. She's self-treated hypothyroidism and has written a top-selling book on that journey around going from doctors that weren't super helpful to, looking at the data and the science and having this self-directed journey on what I call sort of the biohacking ethic, taking control of health into your own hands. So excited to have Elle with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I love this topic, and I feel like more people need to get into tinkering with their own selves. So love that you guys are doing this.
Absolutely. To kick off this new year, one megatrend that I see happening is that populism across all sectors is in vogue or is rising, right? You see that in politics, and I think you start seeing that with healthcare in the sense of biohacking, right? I think people are disillusioned with big pharma, big insurance companies. People aren't getting the best healthcare that they think they deserve, and our healthcare costs are super high and our outcomes are super low. And it's just like this weird, system that's so entrenched. Curious to get your thoughts about that entire sort of movement, especially, in your personal story around, again, self-directing your own treatment.
Well, like you said, the comparative analysis of politics, people more of like populist movement getting away from the old, the outdated, or that's how people saw it. And so that's what we saw, this movement, not only with the rise of Bernie, but Trump. And, both of them were extremely popular as a result of those kind of tenets. And the same goes for health. I mean, let's talk for a second about every single commercial being for diabetes on television right now. Okay. Yeah. So this is a huge deal. So what's hilarious, it's sadly hilarious, but the bottom line is that the government food pyramid promotes a diabetes promoting lifestyle. Now everyone gets diabetes. Now we've got all of the medicines and insulin, igniters that are coming to us from Big Pharma. And at the end of the day, you can biohack that and reverse it through lifestyle and diet. And most people don't know that. So, for example, they go to the doctor, they get prediabetes, and they go, well, is there anything I can do? And the doctor goes, here's this pill. Because doctors don't know anything about nutrition to begin with. And again, right. The hands of pharma. So I think on the same note with politics, people are getting and starting to see that this is a disaster. Again, Big Pharma is great. I take a thyroid hormone every day that comes from a lab made by a pharmaceutical company. Okay, there's value in this, of course. But we're overprescribed, and the bottom line, and I say it in my book, and so does the doctor on my book, who's a primal doctor and a highly decorated functional medicine doctor, which is when you go to see a doctor, a regular doctor, you are asking for a prescription or surgery. That's it. They're not going to give you nutritional advice. That's what you're asking for. So you go.
That's how doctors get paid by insurance companies.
That's
that's how that system works.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned that like the doctors don't know anything about nutrition. I think a lot of people might think that that's strange, but if you actually talk to doctors, they get 4 hours of lecture on nutrition in medical school.
Yeah,
so like if you've spent more than 4 hours
of 30, 40 years ago too, right? Because most of these doctors, right. I'm not talking about a doctor that just graduated. Maybe there's a little bit. But for example, I even heard recently a celebrity wrote an audiobook because they're very fit and people are always asking them like, what do you do? How do you do this? So she's like, okay, I'll write a book, tell everyone how I exercise and eat. And in the chapter on food and nutrition, the first thing out of her mouth, and I literally I clicked stop because I was like, I can't even continue. The first thing out of her mouth was, our body's form of fuel is glucose. And, right there, that's just such an outdated old paradigm. It's not entrenched in science. In fact, it's against the science of how our bodies are meant to work. And again, that tenet right there, well, now we're going towards the diabetes and over glucose and running on that. And, we can get into that primal discussion later or that paradigm. So unfortunately, you go to a doctor to control your health, you're asking for trouble. Not only that, but then you're going to take whatever advice they give because they've got a Harvard degree on the wall. Do you know how many uninformed and also just illogical and unintelligent doctors I have met that have degrees from Yale and Harvard? I've also met lawyers who have degrees from Harvard and Yale that I've had to double check their work and they're missing stuff. So we have this thing like we just trust.
Right.
And you have to double check.
It's a logical fallacy, right? Like,
it is.
Playing to authority is just, Yeah, it's a typical one of those logical fallacies, right? Their arguments need to make sense. Their argument needs to be backed up with data. And I think that's a great point. Don't be overly intimidated by degrees. Well, degrees, are a good signal, perhaps in a lot of cases, but don't just rely on that.
If you're looking for a doctor that's really going to spend some time with you and really look at the root cause of things in your whole system as a whole, including spiritual, mental, emotional, you're looking at functional medicine doctors, anti-aging doctors, and, doctors of osteopathy or chiropractors. I mean, these are the people that are going above and beyond, that know a lot of the natural components. They know what to test for, and they're getting to the root. They're not just going to band-aid you. So if you go to a doctor and you're a woman and you're like, I've had abnormal period bleeding, I'm bleeding more than I should, and blah, blah, the first thing they're going to do is, here's the birth control pill. But why aren't they asking the question, why is this healthy person who's had no issues all of a sudden having issues?
Right.
And they're not even looking to go find there because they've got their 15 minutes, they have their HMO, and they're just slapping a prescription. I had an experience once that wasn't related to thyroid, but I had like, just, I mean, any woman has, you shave your bikini line for summer. I got some ingrown hairs and I was like, oh God. And, they hurt. And I went to the dermatologist because I was like, I don't want these to become a problem, or I don't know what to do, or, and then it was like,
Right.
okay, here's some cream or, whatever. And then I said, well, is there anything else I could do to make it go away faster? And he literally just, without hesitation, wrote me a prescription for a Z-Pak, which is a substantial antibiotic for ingrown
Huh.
hairs, so I could get rid of them quickly. I mean, here's the thing. Now, that would have been a convenience issue, but I am furthering damaging my health in an unnecessary way by taking antibiotics when I don't truly need them. So
Yeah.
that's another example of like, my God, it was just some ingrown hairs at the dermatologist and I'm getting a huge major antibiotic that should only be used in the event of severe situations. Right?
Right, like actual bacterial infections, right? I mean, that's very much overkill. Yeah, I think the business of medicine, I hope at least with all this discussion around reforming Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, we might sort of raise up a lot of these issues with the business of medicine as opposed to actual
Right.
practice of medicine. But before we get into those, too many of the nitty gritty details, I actually want to hear your personal story of how you, became what sparked this enlightenment in looking at and sort of be like, hey, these doctors, I might be actually smarter than them. What was that? What were those initial formative moments for
Well,
you?
I had a lot of physical problems, and it started off with some abnormal bleeding, and then it just the weight gain. My hair was falling out. There were all sorts of classic hypothyroid symptoms that were going on, and I went to a doctor
Mm.
who was taking the wrong tests. A test from 1973 that is not used on its own to assess thyroid health, if you know what you're talking about. But if you don't know what you're talking about, you're still using just this test because you are an uninformed doctor and you don't know what you're doing. So he was taking this test and kept saying, your thyroid's fine. You need to work out more and eat less. And I was like, I'm working out 2 hours a day. I'm putting 800 calories. I know what I'm doing. And this is a mess. And,
So he didn't believe you. He was just like, this lady, this is just
by the
bullshitting
way,
me.
classic story. Anyone listening now who's had a hypothyroid problem knows this. The one thing that everybody tells me is the discounting of the doctor, believing that the patient has a closet eating disorder or think it's in their head. And what it is they are literally just ensconced in the ego of their training 34 years ago, have not looked at the latest research and gone above and beyond. And so they're still practicing old medicine. And in my opinion, I'm sorry, that's borderline malpractice. You know what I mean?
Right.
However, I made the mistake of not questioning him at the time. So I took the birth control pill. Then I took the second one. Then I took the third one. They weren't working. Nothing was working to band-aid the problem because the root of the problem was my thyroid. And until that was corrected,
Right.
never had a problem since. Okay. But I was misdiagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I do not have. When you're in a hypothyroid state, the bottom line is you will get a disease you otherwise would not have gotten because of the state you're in. So then you get all of these things, and the doctor's like, oh, here's this for depression. Here's this for your high cholesterol. Here's this for your bipolar or whatever they think it is. But really, the root cause is here.
Right.
So the frustration, I kept getting sick. I was a disaster. I spent $15,000 of my own money with the PPO, going to some of even the best doctors in Hollywood that were celebrity doctors that have written about celebrity books. And it took me $600 just to have one appointment with a doctor who just took a correct test. It wasn't even the blood work. That was just the appointment. So it literally just cost me that much money to see someone who knew what they were talking about. And then I couldn't even go forward from there because I was broke. But thankfully had been diagnosed and then knew the direction I needed to go in. So what happened is about the first bout of hypothyroidism I got in 10 years, 20, 25 doctors completely discounted me or hurt me, gave me things that actually hurt me. And I was so disenchanted and nobody would help me. And I went online. I found a Yahoo group dedicated for a patient to patient forum of people who've struggled with this. These are the most valuable thing that I did. They guided me in the right direction because they were people who had suffered through this BS before and they knew what to get tested, how to look at it, what things I needed to look into.
Right.
And that just started me on the way. And then there became a point where I was so debilitated in every way physically. I mean, could barely leave the house. And I talk about the 30 plus symptoms I had in my book, which are horrific. And at that point, I was like, this is life or death. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? No one's helping me. I've got no money. I don't have a choice here. So I took the risk on myself and I did my own research. And in my research, I realized how wrong all these doctors were and how idiotic and uninformed they were. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this on my own with the help of some fellow patients who've guided me in the right direction. I
So the
did.
system essentially failed you in the sense that like you try to talk to the
You're
doctors.
damn right. It hurt me. It hurt
Yeah.
me. It hurt me. They hurt me even more. So what happened was is
Overprescribed on different things or things that didn't treat the symptoms and your core underlying cause just got worse and worse.
yeah,
Right.
and also not only that, but I developed a polyp and a fibroid in my uterus because of the undiagnosed scenario with that first doctor.
Right.
So, you know what? Thanks for the surgery, you jerk. I'd like to send you my invoice. Do you know what I mean? I mean, so I was hurt
Right.
literally by doctors. And
Right.
so I thought that's it. So I fixed it myself. I literally ordered my own thyroid medication. I went and used doctors to get blood work. Didn't care what they had to say about it. Just went into, because I had, insurance, just used them for the blood work. And
Like sign off on this. Like I want this test. I want the testosterone test. I want this test.
And then I was
Whatever.
like, I'll take
Yeah.
the info and just do with myself what I want with it because I know this guy's
Right.
an idiot. So I did that and I actually cured myself and remained and was doing great. And then about 6 or 7 years later, a second bout of hypothyroidism, which is kind of rare that happens, which is called thyroid hormone resistance or reverse T3. It's a very rare but increasing problem that even more doctors don't know how to deal with. And
Okay.
so I got this issue totally correctable. But again, I was failed again. Another 20, 25 doctors. I emailed people. I told them this research. I said, this is what I know I have to do. Can you help me do it? This is how I know to fix it. And they were all like, hands up. They're like, one doctor I talk about in the book, she literally looked at me and goes, this is too complicated. And I literally was like, oh, but the MCATs weren't complicated. So organic chemistry wasn't complicated. But this is
Right.
complicated. You got to be kidding me. You got an MD and this is complicated? And so they weren't even willing to learn. They weren't willing to help me. And I literally, that day, the second time in 10 years, sat outside my doctor's office in my car and I bawled my eyes out because I knew I was on my own again. And this time I knew I was really on my own because most doctors really don't know how to fix a reverse T3 problem. And they're very scared of what needs to be prescribed in certain situations that is the only thing that works, which is T3 only. And I had doctors telling me I was going to kill myself. I had doctors telling me I was going to give myself a heart attack. I had doctors telling me that they were going to lose their license if they prescribed me this medication alone. Now, all of those things I just said are so false. These are false,
Right.
stupidity fears on behalf of the doctors. So then a second time, I'm left in the dust a second time. And I'm like, I can't even believe this. You can only imagine how horrific. I'm sitting here going, why me? I mean, are you kidding me? So
Right.
so I did it again. I again, worked with fellow patients online who had been through it, read another person's book on the subject. If anyone has an issue with reverse T3 problem, the best book written on the subject, and really the only one written solely on the subject, is by Paul Robinson called Recovering with T3. And it is an amazing book. And he was just a patient in England who suffered for 30 years because no one could figure out why this was going on. And then he wrote a book and he's
Right.
saving lives. So he really saved my life too. So then
I mean, the people suffering care the most, right? Like, end of the day, like Robertson. I mean, this is your day, your everyday life. You're living with this pain, and it makes sense that like you would do anything to figure out what's going on. And the doctors,
I was willing to go to an ashram in India. I didn't know what I had to do. I was like, I will go to the ends of the earth because
right,
life is not worth this. It is
right,
not worth living this way. And even though I was never actively suicidal, I can absolutely see how people can get suicidal because it not only causes depression when you have low T3 levels in your brain, but then look at all the horrible things that are happening to you along the way.
right. You
And
have no hope, and then no one's helping you, and people like are telling you the wrong things. And you're just like, fuck it, like no one cares. Like,
people have been suffering for 20, 30 years still. I meet people all the time who have suffered for 20 years at the hands of the doctors. But then I just want to say this. What have you done as the patient? Ugh, got to step up. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I cannot tell you how many people I have met. Almost everyone I've met that's just already on thyroid hormone, and maybe they're not even doing well or whatever. They have no idea what they're taking. They have
Right.
no
And they
idea,
just give up. They're like, I don't know.
or they just take the pill and they go, "Oh, I have a thyroid problem. I take this pill every day," and they don't know what the pill means or how it's affecting them. So
Right.
my biggest message is, if you get diagnosed with something, you better get into it. Get into it. Get messy. Get in there. Do the research. Help your doctor help you, or help yourself by being able to realize you might not be with the right doctor.
I like that a lot. I mean, I think it's just like you got to empower people, right? Like people can't be so lazy with their lives. Like that's your only asset, your health, essentially, your health and time. Like if that's a big thing that's a tax on your health, then like dive in. Exactly. Get messy, dive into it. You should understand what's bothering you or problematic with you and then fix it. Take control of the information into your own hands and take action on it. I'm curious what you think about the system, right? Like I think we all know young doctors or doctors in training that have good intentions going into the medical field, right? Like the do no harm, Hippocrates oath. Um, what do you think goes wrong when I think you have these like young, bushy tailed, smart kids going to medical school, learning a bunch about, very complicated things like organic chemistry, different, metabolic pathways. What goes wrong? What do you think goes
Cutting
wrong?
open a human cadaver. I
Right.
mean, my God, like, right?
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think is wrong with the system? What happens?
Well, some of the training is outdated on some fields. However, what I really think is the biggest problem, and Dr. Forsman talks about this in the Q&A section of my book, which is you're trained to fear litigation. So if as a doctor, all you're doing is to try to avoid being sued, how are you going to do the practice of medicine? The practice of medicine takes some trial and error. It takes some experimenting. It takes some going out of the box a little bit and trying something that might not be within this box of what you were, right? This is where these functional medicine doctors, integrative doctors, anti-aging doctors, they take those leaps. They take those risks. They're not afraid
Right.
of being sued. They are for the patient. They're pro science. They geek out on this stuff, and I've talked about this before on my podcast. I don't know about you, but I want a doctor that still totally geeks out on this stuff. And
Of course. Yeah.
and Dr. Forsman talks about it. He goes, back in the day when you're in medical school, everyone's very excited. You have a problem you can't figure out. You're into it. This was like the juiciness of being in medical school. And at some point, those people lost it, along with the indoctrination and, this level of, how could I have spent all this money and 10 years of my life and gone to Harvard and not learned everything that I should know?
Right.
And I have a degree in philosophy, right? Like you guys, sometimes you don't know stuff, right? You just can't claim. You have to be open to the fact that you might not know everything.
100%.
So I think it's a litigiousness, right? And so one of the things is these physician assistants and stuff, because Dr. Forsman is training a few of them, and he has said that they are just entrenched with this fear of being litigated. It's not only that, it's that the insurance companies are making also the coding really complicated. They're trying to screw all the patients so that things won't get covered. So they're making that even more complicated. Now you have doctors who've got this whole extra level of like, oh, there's new codes. Now I have to figure out how I'm gonna, shimmy
Bill
sham
patients. Right.
and shimmy around so that I can get this covered for my patients, so that A, they're not yelling at me, and also so that it's fair, right? So there's a lot of layers to this, but I think at the end of the day, the bottom line is a doctor who is still geeking out and in the practice of medicine and
Right.
willing to learn, willing to go, will you be open to read this book? Can you look at this research I brought you? Someone who's open to that. I mean, I've brought books and things and research into doctors, and they've been like, well, I'm not going to read this. And I'm like, I get it. You have 15 minutes.
And that's also just very poor patient care, right? Like that's some soft skills that like doctors should be good at, right? Like you have to like feel like, hey, I'm listening to my patient. If someone didn't listen to me, I'd be like, you don't respect me, screw you too, kind of a deal.
Right. And also too, a lot of doctors are dictated by insurance companies. They have 15 minutes. Your standard HMO doctor has 10,
Right.
15 minutes. You go to a functional medicine doctor, you pay for them. Your insurance can get reimbursed. They're not dealing with being, ensconced in
I think that's a
it's a
great
big one.
point.
And so here's the thing. People, it's this weird thing. You want to stay within the insurance and get your money's worth. But if you really want good health, you have to get above and beyond and pay a little extra. What is your health worth? To me, invaluable.
Right.
If it's going to cost you 2 grand to go to a great doctor to get a full workup and everything and like totally get fixed, $2,000 in the grand scheme of someone's life, are you kidding me? You could probably find enough friends to scrounge up that money,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know?
I think that's like the one of the most important points. I think that hits one of the cruxes here is that, yeah, if you're seeing a doctor once a year for 10, 15 minutes, they have that one snapshot over what, a couple years, they see you twice. That's like not a lot of data, right? If you look at, from a computer science background, machine learning or AI, it's all about good sources of data. And we're all living with our bodies on a daily basis. We have so much sample of our own states all the time that of course that we should have a better grasp on our condition than no matter how smart that person is, someone that sees you twice in 2-3 years for 15 minutes.
Well, and they're also not doing in-depth testing. So, for example, went and got my physical, even though I didn't have doctors deal with my thyroid health after a certain point. I still would go in and get my, physical, get the CBC, get the lipid panel done, the classic standard checkup, right?
Right.
Now, here's the thing. If you looked at my blood work and you were any doctor, you'd be like, you're doing great. You keep doing what you're doing. Your lipid panel looks awesome. Then you go to a functional doctor and like Dr. Forsman, which I did. And this was after I'd already fixed myself, but I was also looking to optimize. I had been in a hypothyroid state a couple times in 10 years. And I was like, stuff might have gone wrong. Let's get the shit working right. And there might be other things. And he tested me and did some in-depth testing and found out I was pre-diabetic. I had excess fibrin in my blood. I could have had a heart attack or stroke at the age of 42. So stupid, so dumb. Took me 3 months of supplements to just get all of those levels back to normal, no risk. So all of those other doctors were going, this looks great. Your lipid panel, CBC, all the standard one shot across the board every doctor takes, you look great. But guess what? Underneath the surface, not so great. Could have died. What the fuck is that? Excuse my language. Sure. What is that about, right? That says something. So if you really want to get to the bottom and want a thorough checkup in every way that's catered to you, you need to go above and beyond and find these better doctors. Functional medicine doctor will spend an hour with you. So, that's huge.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to look at it. Find a partner that cares about optimizing your health as much as you do. Or, as opposed to someone that's like looking at you as a number on their list of like things to churn through and then issue a script.
Yeah, and you still have to follow your gut. Like, for example, Dr. Forsman on my book, who I love. In fact, through writing the book, I found him as my doctor, which was so great. But one of the things is like he suggested a supplement I take, and he said, here, take 200 milligrams. Well, then there's still my part. Well, I had a gut instinct. I was like, I don't know. I kind of want to start off with 50 milligrams. So I did. And, I'm sure he was probably like, that's fine, whatever you're comfortable with, right? You know what I mean? So again, even just because a doctor I trust tells me something, you still have to follow your gut. And there's nothing wrong with that, or there's nothing wrong with challenging it either. You just have to be with a doctor who's open to that. You know what I mean? And a lot of doctors are, the ego is insane. And that's the problem. It's not just this litigious stuff we're talking about or the system. It's literally the ego of doctors. In my opinion, it's like, how can you have an ego here? In this soup with the patient, how does ego? How is that helping anybody? Do you know what I mean?
I think it's just the system is just like rough when you have to see like 50 patients a day. They don't even know your name. They're just trying to get your core metrics, and then boom, here's a script. What do you want? Do you want some antibiotics? Do you want some steroids? What do you want? Like, maybe I'll give it to you, right? It's like a machine to churn out scripts essentially. I mean that's essentially how if you look at incentives, right? If you design systems, you have to look at incentives, and if you're aligning incentives towards issuing scripts and churning through patients, well, that's the healthcare system that we'll be getting.
That's right, and that is what we have. So you have